Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, Iran prepares for further U.S. escalation.
From Tehran, accusations from the Speaker of Parliament that the U.S. is preparing a ground offensive. That's despite President Trump's talk of negotiations.
As things escalate in the region, what would Iran need to agree to a ceasefire? I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take. Hi. Before we continue with today's show, remember to leave us a comment telling us what you think about this episode. Do you think there's a ceasefire coming anytime soon? And what stories do you want us to do next? And remember, when you're on your favorite podcast app, leave us a review telling us where you're listening from and give us a 5-star rating. It does help the show.
Alex Roldan, I'm a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C., and I focus on Iranian affairs.
Alex, welcome to The Take. So your work, as you said, you focus on Iran's relationship with the U.S. and its neighbors. So you're a very good person to be talking to at this moment. We're coming off another weekend of escalation, right? Strikes on sites across the Gulf. Infrastructure in Iran is still being targeted. You have Donald Trump saying out loud that he could take the oil in Iran. And oh, yes, there's this looming threat of American boots on the ground. So I feel like there's a lot of coverage of Donald Trump and his state of mind from day to day, how he might want to end the war. But I'm hoping that our discussion can focus mainly on Iran itself. And one thing I keep reading is that the war is continuing because both sides feel they're winning. So why does Iran feel it's winning this war?
So the Iranians basically are satisfied in the sense that the regime's still intact. Over a month into this war, they are still intact. They lost their supreme leader. They've lost dozens and dozens of senior members of the regime. And yet, the Islamic Republic is still in business. It's in control of Iran, all of its territory. It's still firing ballistic missiles and drones in all sorts of directions. And it's got the Strait of Hormuz basically under its control, which means it has the global economy's attention. And for those reasons, they feel that they are doing a pretty good job. Obviously, they're suffering massively in terms of daily bombardment by Israel, by the United States. But it seems to me that that's a price they are willing to pay. They think they can rebuild, if you will. But they shouldn't throw in the towel too early. That's the one thing that you keep hearing from them, that if you are Iran at this point, having survived this long, if you are prematurely accepting what they consider to be unacceptable U.S. demands, then you've lost a strategic opportunity. So that's where they're at right now.
So it is hard to know what's happening with the government there. I think most people know the basics, right? Ali Khamenei is dead. His son Mojtaba has been named the new supreme leader, and that the Revolutionary Guard is very powerful. But you've written about the nuances of Iran's factional system for years. So in concrete terms, how has this war changed the power structure inside the Islamic Republic?
Look, if you want to sort of have a big historic look at the Islamic Republic of the last couple of decades, we used to divide it up into sort of two large camps, the so-called reformists and the hardliners. Now, Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader who was assassinated or killed on the 28th of February, he played this game of balancing the two. That was his kind of role. That's how he preferred to be sort of politically engaged, as the balancing act. He's gone. And so there is that potential for the key role of a balancing actor that Khamenei played from 1989 till his death, about 36 years, that's vacant. So that raises questions. So what happens to that balance? And that might become an issue going forward. But as of today, we can tell for sure the so-called hardliners, which I include the Revolutionary Guards to be part of, they are in the driver's seat. They're in charge, basically, of the key policies in Iran, both domestic and foreign. The so-called reformist, and if you want to include the president of today, Masoud Pezeshkian, his team, many of whom come from that reformist camp, they're also in business, but not in sort of setting strategic course. What they're doing is running everyday affairs, making sure people have power and water and that sort of thing. So going forward, depending on how this war unfolds, the one area to watch is what would happen to that balance of power. Will the reformists who are more pragmatic, who are more keen to sort of look for a diplomatic off-ramp, would they have more to say? Would they have more space to operate in weeks and months to come? That remains to be seen.
At the beginning of the war, there was a lot of talk about the cellular structure of the defense capability. I think there was talk that sometimes there were commanders who were firing off drones into certain parts that weren't being authorized by the central government. As best as you can tell, has that settled somewhat? That there is a real a command and control, like there's one or two, or a structure that is calling shots day to day?
Look, it's really difficult to say. Iran has never been here before, fighting two, pretty powerful adversaries, a superpower, United States, and another very powerful regional state. So you have to assume that they are trying to improvise on a day-to-day basis as they're getting hammered, and they're trying to respond. So we have to assume there's a degree of disconnect in parts of the system, also because of the number of assassinations that have been going on. But overall, my take is not one of an Iranian system where we can detect these people are not at all in sync in terms of what they're doing. Overall, being open to diplomacy, I haven't, for example, seen Iranian military action that I would say for sure undermine any kind of diplomatic approach. That to me suggests that they are more or less in sync. That doesn't surprise me because, again, you have to assume the Islamic Republic has prepared for a war like this for a very long time. All sorts of scenarios might have been planned out. So the fact that, 1 month plus into this war, they're still more or less speaking with one voice and going in the same direction shouldn't come as a surprise. But obviously, as this war goes on, unfolds, and more Iranian leaders and capabilities are taken out, then it's a real question mark how long this unity, if you will, of sorts can continue.
Let's stick with that. From your perspective, what would have to happen inside Iran for this war to produce real political change rather than just more military and economic damage? I mean, are we talking about splits within elites, a collapse of the system's capacity to govern, a new kind of organized opposition forming, or what do you think?
So far, we haven't seen any defections. So far, we haven't seen a prominent leader in the Islamic Republic come out in public and say this war should, be wrapped up today. Let's talk to the Americans. Let's revisit all our ideological core, pillars. None of that has happened so far. That doesn't mean that those voices of dissent don't exist. They do. We know they do. They're just not coming out as of today, and that probably is a safe bet. I mean, look, if you come out today in Iran and you question the war effort, as they would put it, then you're putting yourself at risk of being eliminated. You could become labeled a traitor and put away. So timing here is of essence. If you want to be a defector, when you come out and how you come out is very important. But we do know there are tensions in the Islamic Republic because that's been the true story of the Islamic Republic from the beginning of this system. For 47 years, there have been differences of opinion in terms of where to go in domestic policies and foreign policies. But I would say this, in the midst of a war where we could perhaps see most likely tensions on a political level, it's probably not in Tehran, the capital. It's more likely to happen on the fringes of the country, like the Kurdish areas or other ethnic minority areas, where you could see groups that have a history of militancy, separatist groups and so forth, taking action, if you will. They haven't so far. There was reporting that the Kurds in Iran's western regions were getting ready to enter this war with the aim of, fighting the central government. That didn't happen. It's a scenario that could happen. Again, so much depends on how long this war goes on for, because we have to assume as the war continues, this assumption that the regime will remain to be as strong as it is today is maybe a faulty one, that it might have, defections and friction inside of it, which would weaken it, which would create opportunities for new political dynamics to emerge.
Yeah, the government seems to be on the front foot. It seems like it's almost swaggering. Maybe that is at the moment, but do you think there's a danger that they could overplay their hand and extend this too long?
Again, the Islamic Republic has a tendency in a history of, really falling for its own rhetoric. And yeah, I think there's a danger here of Iran, if it's not careful, to overplay its hand, overconfidence. And again, I would point out to the Iran-Iraq war, a prime example of misreading the situation. The Iranian regime back then in the 1980s had an opportunity to end that war 2 years after 2 years of fighting, and they insisted on keep going and they add another 6 years to that war, which cost Iran hundreds of billions of dollars more in damages and many more dead. So there's a history of overconfidence being an issue for this regime. It could be the case again, or maybe they've learned the lessons from the past, and actually when the opportunity presents itself in terms of an off-ramp, they will be serious about taking it.
Okay, well, let's talk about what that off-ramp might look like. When Iranian officials talk about ending this war, what would you say are the minimum requirements? Is it like sanctions relief, guarantees against future assassination of leaders? What are the red lines?
All I can tell you at this point is the 15 points that the U.S. has put on the table and the 5 points that the Iranians have put on as a counter, they're wide apart. I mean, there's no way these two can be reconciled. So the question is, can they go back, revisit their demands, soften their positions, and look for that middle ground? As of today, the Iranians feel that, again, this is a war of attrition. This is a war where whoever can stomach longer staying in this is more likely to prevail. And they feel they have much to gain, and they're not necessarily as exposed as, say, the United States, Israel, the Gulf states, in terms of the pains that are coming along with this war. So the Iranians are as of today, sitting back and believing that time is on their side. They don't think, and this is a fundamental factor in their thinking, they don't think Donald Trump will invade and occupy Iran, which means that they consider this war as basically a lot of airstrikes coming their way, maybe potential of special forces landing on Iranian soil. But again, special forces doing tactical operations, not occupying the place. And as long as you don't occupy Iran, which is a huge undertaking by any measure, then the regime feels it can take blow after blow, maybe even lose control over parts of the territory at times, but still survive. So they are in that survival mode, but they are still at this point hopeful that they can come out of this not having been defeated, make the point that they can be defeated, and then, look for a deal perhaps that can work both for the Iranians and the Americans. But that obviously is the big question, how that would look like.
Yeah, and the other thing that is critical is making sure that there is no attack in the future. That's because of what happened during the 12-day war. And there was a lot of dissent within the hardline faction that said they never should have started the ceasefire. And I think those people were vindicated, weren't they?
Well, yeah, I mean, the hardliners are using that argument that the United States cannot be trusted, and the United States was never sincere in its diplomatic outreach to Iran. That's one way of looking at it, because the American side can put the counter argument and say Iran was never sincere in its diplomatic outreach, that, any effort just aimed at the nuclear issue was never going to be realistically a long-term solution, that if you want to create the conditions for sustained dialogue and peace, you had to quickly broaden the conversation from the nuclear deal to other issues, to, for example, what Iran does in the region and so forth. The Iranian regime, certainly until Ali Khamenei was alive, never went there. And that was a lost opportunity. So again, it's such a subjective matter, depends who you ask. But, I think the Iranian side, as of today, are in the belief that they can stay in this war. They have lots to gain, potentially, not just survival of the regime, but actually coming out of it stronger. And the idea, which they think is what basically the U.S. is asking for, to give up entirely any kind of Iranian deterrence, give up your nuclear program, give up your missiles, give up your proxies. They're saying if you do that, well, that's the end of the Islamic Republic anyway, so why even try?
Yeah. The move that upended everything was the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian officials and state media are now talking quite openly about a new regime for the Strait of Hormuz after this war. This would include everything from tolls on commercial shipping to, I guess, a kind of de facto veto over the movement of hostile navies through this vital checkpoint. We've all learned how vital this checkpoint is. Do you think this is a serious bid for control over the Strait long term, or a bargaining chip?
When you look at the two sets of proposals that Washington and Iran put forward, both of them are engaging in maximalist demands. I mean, it's about posture. Both of them are unrealistic in terms of what they're expecting the other side to provide. So, for Iran to talk about having control of the Strait of Hormuz, It's a case of what we were talking about earlier, overconfidence, overplaying your hand. It's not even in Iran's interest to do so, because in an ideal world, I am assuming the Iranians want to go back and repair badly damaged relations with the Gulf states, right? The last thing you want to do is to tell the Gulf states that you're going to keep the flow of goods in and out of into the region, which the Gulf states depend on more so than Iran. You want to take that hostage. That's a non-starter for the Gulf states. So yes, I think the Iranians are engaging in some kind of a bravado here, talking a big game, kind of similar in some ways as Donald Trump does when it comes to his demands of Iran. But end of the day, the realistic path forward is to look for that middle ground. Then if you start building confidence in those political tracks, particularly between Washington and Tehran, this whole idea of, having control of the Strait of Hormuz becomes a secondary issue. Because the reason why we're talking about who controls the Strait of Hormuz was Iranians found out asymmetric warfare, which is something they have going for them, meant they could use the Strait of Hormuz and taking control of it as part of their arsenal, if you will. But in a different political environment, there's no need for that. So that's why it becomes so critical to think about, can you have a more comprehensive political solution that creates enough confidence in the parties involved that issues like who controls the Strait of Hormuz, as I said, becomes secondary.
We started the podcast talking about how both sides feel they're winning this war. If you wanted to take the other view, how much damage are the Americans and Israelis doing to Iran itself, their capability to strike, and also damage to the economy, the infrastructure, all that stuff?
Well, look, it's impossible to say because so much of the information we have in the open source is essentially kind of borderline propaganda. The United States says they've destroyed the Iranian military. I'm sure they have brought a lot of damage. We see the footage, we see the data coming out, but we also see Iranian missiles continuing to land in Israel and places like Gulf countries. So, we have to be very careful. Both sides engage in sort of making sure they look good, if you will. But there's no denying that Iran today is suffering in the sense of thousands, tens of thousands of sites being hit. The industrial base of the country is a target. Particularly the Israelis are hitting Iranian industrial base. It could escalate. It could become one. The latest post by President Trump talks about if there's no diplomatic solution, then anything in Iran, including civilian infrastructure, will be fair game for targeting. Really dark scenario to contemplate because the Iranians have said, and we have only to trust their word, given what they've done in recent weeks, that if that happens, they're going to hit infrastructure across the region, which puts the Gulf states again in a firing line. So this could still escalate. This could still go south. This could still get worse than it is today. But for now, and it's an open question how long Iran can stay in this fight, but for now, they're able to stay in the fight. And they're retaliating. As I said, they don't think it's prudent for them to throw in the towel prematurely. And so for now, they're in the war.
What do you make of all the talk about Kharg Island? Donald Trump seems to have a real obsession with it. You talked about earlier, the Islamic Republic has been preparing for this attack for years and years and years. It seems like they've had ample time to prepare for the possibility of U.S. troops trying to take Kharg Island. How could you see that playing out?
Look, I can see an operation of that nature taking Kharg Island obviously doable for the United States military. But as I said, it's symbolic, it's psychological. I can see how you use control of Kharg Island as leverage to ask for concessions from the Iranians, whether it's them sort of letting ships through the Strait of Hormuz or something else. Certainly, you can take their economy hostage, if you will, but there are downsides to this as well. One is, if you take Kharg Island, you're taking Iranian oil off the market. And we know how the Trump administration is very sensitive to the price of oil. Yeah. And if you take that Iranian oil off the market, that's not going to be good for the price of oil. It's going to keep going up. The other thing is you can take it, but then you have to hold it. So what do? You have thousands of American special forces sitting on an island within range of Iranian drones, artillery, and so forth. I can just imagine the scenes that could come out from a war zone like that. We've seen it in Ukraine with the images of drones being used to, kill infantry and so on. Politically, it's a very slippery slope for the Trump administration because so far, the number of American casualties has been limited. This could go and become a problem if something like Kharg Island has to be not only occupied, but kept.
Okay, so as we wrap up, I just want to ask you, what about the day after? right? Say we get to some kind of ceasefire where Tehran can say, we survived, we forced the Americans to negotiate, we got something on sanctions or on the Strait of Hormuz. In that version of events, are we looking at a more confident, kind of more militarized Islamic Republic that leans even harder on the IRGC? Or do you think it could be a weaker, more brittle state that's kind of burned through all of its economic and political capital?
We can only speculate. We can only speculate because anybody who tells you with certainty they know what's going to happen, they really don't know the Iranian system. Because even the IRGC, even the Revolutionary Guards, the notion that they're all hardliners, it's a big fat lie. Anybody who studied IRGC will tell you there are factions within it. Some of them are ideologically inclined in terms of how to look at the world. Others are actually far more pragmatic. The so-called technocrat in the IRGC, who are no different than the civilian government. They are just part of the state machinery. They have a uniform on, but they do want to survive as individuals, as organizations. So we don't know where the place is going. Survival is one thing that keeps everyone in the system right now together. But other than that, there are huge differences of opinion about what's best for the regime and what's best for Iran, the country. And on top of all this, the guy who kept it together for about 37 years, Ali Khamenei, is gone. So for sure, there's a generational opportunity if this regime survives this war, and it's a big if. We really don't know if they will survive and if the United States is going to go and get engaged even more so in the country with the aim of bringing the regime down. That is also a scenario. Even what people assume Donald Trump wouldn't do it, he might actually go in that direction. So there is a big question mark if the regime survives. If it survives, the big challenge it has is go down the path of, say, North Korea, where you become a fortress, you keep everything out, and your only way of staying in power is to killing your own people. Repression becomes the only tool you have at your disposal of staying in power. Or they can say, the last many years of decisions were wrong. Let's look inside our country. Let's listen to the people's aspirations, which are very different than the ideological, pursuits of the regime. Let's look for a new contract with our own people. Because if they do that, then the regime has no way but change course and go in a very different direction. Again, as a last attempt to maybe survive in the longer term by having the people of Iran accept them, which right now is not the case.
Wow. Okay. Alex, thank you for coming on The Take today.
Thank you very much for having me.